comfortable for white people. They're not comfortable for them to talk about the possibility that Africans were here before the Europeans. So what do you do with the heads in Mexico that you find at San Lorenzo, at Tres Zapotes? What do you do with those? All right? You ignore them. What do you do with Columbus's diary that says the Africans know a way to the west, but it goes around the doldrums, we would never survive? What do you do with that? You ignore it. What do you do with Balboa's diary that says we came upon this African village in the isthmus? How did these Africans get here? What do you do with that? You ignore it. Why? To preserve the myth that the Europeans were here first. What do you do with all of this written literature and history that says that Abubakar II of Mali sent 200 ships to the west? One came back and said they were afraid that the others disappeared. And then to have Balboa find this village that looks just like Mali, where he was, what do you do with this information? You ignore it. You ignore it. Why? To preserve the myth of white superiority. That's what our whole educational process is devoted to. What do you do with this whole history? This is a written history, my dear. Written. I'm not talking about hearsay. I'm not talking about a griot said this. I'm not talking about something handed down from one generation to the other through voice. I'm talking about written history of the Egyptians. What do you do with this?
You see, you simply ignore it and you just whitewash history. And you don't talk about Mary Jane Patterson, who was the first black woman to earn a bachelor's degree in 1862. You ignore the fact that Elijah McCoy, he held 57 U.S. patents, mostly related to the railway. McCoy's inventions were associated with quality and good function, which started people using the phrase, the real McCoy, to refer to quality products. You ignore the fact that after being denied a teaching job for being too black, Nanny Helen Burroughs, she would later open the National Training School for Women and Girls, a trade school for high school and college-age girls in 1909. If that ain't black girl magic, I don't know what is. Now, I could go on for days, but you see, a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without its roots, and those would be facts on 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 top of facts.
Let's talk a little bit more.
Carry on.
You see, not only do they deny those facts, but you also want to deny the fact that when after Bubakari and he gave his decided when he got that report from the one ship that returned, that he set about over across the Atlantic on his own with another 300 ships. And that's how Mansa Musa became the king of Mali. We ignore the fact that when Christopher Columbus even decided to make this voyage, that he had 4 black men to lead his 4 ships, whose father and themselves had came out of the Ivory Coast, because he understood and knew that there was an African dialect that was being spoken over in the Americas, and that he knew that these men talked about the Atlantic River, which was and is the current that will bring you over to the Americas. We see this every year. It's called the flow. It's the flow that brings hurricanes into the Caribbean, which is why he landed in the Caribbean, not in the Americas. You see, the African knew about this, but they didn't want to accept it. They ignored the fact that the gold-tipped spears that they had already been receiving in the Americas completely matched the gold that is found in Ghana, to demonstrate that the trading had already been happening, or that Columbus's brother in his journals talked about how there was large black men with the natives, and how not DeSoto, but Cortez spoke of the same thing when he landed in the Yucatan Peninsula, that these black men were standing there and had been trading with the natives in America. You see, our people didn't come to conquer, didn't come to do that. No, they came to settle in the case of the Mali. But in all other cases, from Ghana and Senegal and Ivory Coast, they came to trade and realized there was a current that went down South America and then came back across to Africa and would make that voyage to trade with people. Good trade, not coming as a conquering hero or anything of that nature. They will ignore the fact that the phenotype of many people in South America matches that of those of Polynesians as well as those of Japan, indicating that those people have been coming and trading with the people in South America long prior to any European coming across. As a matter of fact, it is only more recently that they would even allow for you to understand that the Vikings, who were non-Christians, came across and hit Newfoundland long before Columbus ever even thought about the idea of it all. But the Vikings were not Christian, so they could not be accounted for. And this myth of Columbus being the first European over here is even something that they had to try to keep quiet for a very long time, and only in more recent decades have they allowed for even that truth to come out about people who look like them, but they didn't worship like them, so they had to be wrong. They don't want to tell you that if you go down into South Africa, you can find Adam's calendar. Adam's calendar is 75,000 years old. They tried to initially say that it was just a natural rock formation. Then they had to come and realize, and they said that, oh, well, it was a place to hold cattle. Well, if they was holding cattle, then there had to be some people who domesticated the cattle. Now, only recently have they actually accepted and will put out the information that Adam's calendar was actually a civilization, a township, a place where people lived and raised their cattle. And this is 75,000 years ago, meaning that these people lived there, did this prior to the last ice age. And then from that ice age, migrated out of Africa into other regions that they now claim to be their own, as if they are indigenous of those regions. But they're not indigenous at all. They came from Africa. Africa is the cradle of civilization, not Mesopotamia. There were already civilizations around the world long before Mesopotamia ever started to become a civilization by the method that they quote, what is a civilization? We have to learn our own history. We have to learn real history. And we have to stop accepting just what the victors are telling us. So y'all have a great day. And remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.